Looking at the FX space, really it's a case of continuation patterns. We have seen some decent moves recently, but a lot of what we're looking at really is about, are we going to see a continuation of the moves that we've seen over the past couple of days? Now, bearing in mind that we have been seeing the indices start to pull back somewhat, then a lot of that is going to be related to that. We also have the whole Brexit story with the pound, and we're starting to see that sell off very heavily. Now, this has been a very extended trade towards a downside for sterling, and I wrote a piece just yesterday talking about what would happen in the case of a Brexit, but also in the lead up to a Brexit. There's a good chance that we could see markets going a little bit over the top, really selling very heavily into sterling. And bearing in mind that the current base case scenario is for us to remain within the EU, and therefore you can think about that. If the markets sell off really heavily in terms of sterling and then we actually remain within the EU, what would that do for pound? You'd likely see a very, very sharp appreciation for the pound. So that could be a very interesting one. It's going to be interesting to see what happens in the lead up to the Brexit and how the polls change in the lead up to that as well. We're going to start off by looking at what's happening in terms of euro dollar, very commonly traded currency pair. We can see here it's very interesting the fact that we broke back below this 11059 level. Now that was a resistance point from mid-December, and we saw this break towards the upside following this descending channel. Big bullish move, then we started retracing it. This still looks like a retracement of this wider move, but it's becoming more protracted. Now, when we came into contact with this 11.059, we got those two long lower shadows, but the key was whether we could sustain price above that and start to create, in terms of the intraday basis, higher highs and higher lows. We didn't see that. We saw a crash back below that level, and you can see it sold off very sharply. Then we've seen this essential sideways consolidation with this triangle, descending triangle at the end of it, and now we've managed to break and close below this 10990 for a continuation of this bearish outlook that we've been seeing recently. But be aware, we've also got this 10967 coming into play. We've got the stochastics looking oversold. If we bring it back to the daily time frame, we can see, again, similar kind of thing, very oversold in terms of the stochastics. We're coming back into a cluster of moving averages here, and therefore there's a good chance, so that's the 50 and the 100 day, there's a good chance we could start to see this turn at some point in the near future. I wouldn't necessarily be a seller in terms of a longer term time frame. I would be a seller in terms of shorter term moves, and I'd be more interested in just playing it on a few hour basis and making sure that we actually, if we pull back up to an interesting level, then selling it into that for a short move and not necessarily being caught up in the idea that we're going to see a more protracted and long-term move lower in the euro, because quite honestly we've seen a big move higher previously, and this still looks like a retracement of that move, so there is still a chance that we could see a bounce coming into play in line with these big moves higher that we've seen back in December and back in the beginning of February. Looking at what's happening in terms of sterling, we were talking about the potential for this to become overextended. This is the daily time frame. I'm going to bring it out to the monthly time frame just to show where we are in a historical context. You can see that we have broken really into a sort of area of clear air. That's probably why we're seeing such strong selling coming into play here. Therefore, what we're looking at here is, if I get rid of this fib expansion, what we're looking at here is a very clear trend, and therefore it's a great kind of thing to be playing in terms of short-term time frames. We look at the hourly chart, you can get those nice pullbacks, you get a decent entry, and therefore you just sell it off once again. Now, one key support level today was 13964. That was a support level that underpinned price action all throughout the morning. As soon as we got closed below there, now it's selling off heavily once more. Looks like we're essentially looking like we could be within another one of these moves, so a breakout from consolidation to then pull back, see a couple of days of sideways. So we could see further downside to come within this. Essentially, I'm looking for retracements as further opportunities to get short. But bear in mind that as this market continues to sell off heavily, I think it's going to come to a point that we could actually start to see this market get overextended and see a decent bounce back. But it doesn't look like that's going to happen at the moment, and it's a very, very consistent trend, and that is exactly the kind of thing that we're looking for within the markets at the moment. Now, looking at dollar yen, we can see that we've got this consolidation coming into play. Now, the sell-off here is in line with the fact that we're starting to see some of the indices sell off, because of this is a sort of move towards safe haven assets, a move towards the yen. Yen typically strengthens when we see sell-offs in terms of the likes of oil and in terms of the indices. So we have a downtrend coming into play, or in play over the last week. We have consolidation, and we continue to set those lower highs within that consolidation, we have a level here of support 11166, and we have the fact that it's looking like we're going to see a big move lower in terms of the indices. Therefore, I would wait for a move below 11166, but I do think that that is going to be the direction of play, and that's where we're going to break out. I think we're going to see further downside. I do think we're going to see another decent move towards the downside. Let's bring it back to the 4-hour chart to see where the next sort of area of support might be. So 11066 again is the key level to be watching there, and that is followed by very little. You can see 110 as well, you've got a previous peak there, and 107, which is this big topping pattern, the projection lower. So I do think we're going to see further selling, and I think that's in line with the fact that I think we're going to see further downside in terms of the indices space.